My name is Michael, I'm 42, and for 27 years I believed my family was just, complicated. I thought I was the silent hero, holding everything together after my father died. That lie shattered the night my mother, Eleanor, slapped my wife, Sarah, at the annual family charity gala in Charlotte. It wasn't the slap that changed everything, it was the silence afterward. How quickly can a lifetime of lies shatter? A phone call from state auditors, a critical generator mysteriously failing, and a forgotten file box filled with a decade of my quiet sacrifices. All of it unraveled in less than 2 weeks. My mother, Eleanor, sipping her morning coffee, meticulously planning her next charity event, had no idea the truth was finally coming for her. Before I tell you what happened when they saw me, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this story. Also, I'd love to know where you're watching from and what time it is there. Drop a comment below. I never imagined the annual family charity gala would be the night I finally chose my wife over my mother. Looking back, the slap wasn't what ended 27 years of pretending everything was fine. It was my 11-year-old daughter Chloe's question afterward. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The evening in Charlotte, North Carolina, was crisp that year, the kind of cold that carried the scent of pine and polished asphalt. The grand ballroom, rented for the Evergreen Senior Living Gala, glowed with soft, golden lights and intricate floral arrangements, looking like something straight off a society page. If a stranger had driven past, they would have thought our family was perfect. I almost believed it myself. Sarah sat beside me in the luxury sedan, smoothing the wrinkles out of a simple, elegant gift bag she'd decorated with tiny silver ribbons. "You think they'll like them?" she asked. I smiled. "They'd have to be crazy not to." She laughed softly, though I could hear the uncertainty underneath. For the past 3 weeks, she'd spent every evening at the kitchen island with Chloe, making personalized keepsakes by hand. Little hand-engraved wooden plaques, painted ceramic tiles, custom-stitched textile art, tiny names burned into each one with an inexpensive craft tool she'd bought years ago for her online shop. Money had never been the point. Time was. Love was. When we finally walked inside, the ballroom already smelled like rich coffee, delicate pastries, and the subtle perfume of expensive flowers. A sophisticated jazz quartet played quietly through the living room speakers while my younger brother Daniel poured champagne. "Good evening, Michael," he said, giving me a quick hug. His wife Veronica barely looked up from arranging high-end boutique gift bags beneath the silent auction items. Every one of them had a familiar designer logo on it. Saks, Tiffany & Company, Neiman Marcus. Veronica noticed our simple gift bag almost immediately. "Oh," she said with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. "You two made gifts again." Chloe beamed. "We made everybody something." She couldn't wait to hand them out. Sarah squeezed her shoulder proudly. Watching them together always reminded me how lucky I was. For nearly 15 years, we believed we'd never have children. 2 miscarriages, endless doctor appointments, more tears than either of us could count. Then Chloe came along when we'd almost stopped hoping. To us, every moment with her still felt like a miracle. She carefully handed Veronica the first keepsake, a small wooden plaque engraved with a delicate, intertwining vine design. Veronica turned it over once. "Oh." She forced a laugh. "Homemade." Nobody spoke. She set it on a nearby display table instead of placing it with the other gifts. "I guess that's what people do when they can't afford real presents for a charity gala." Sarah kept smiling. "They're made with love." Veronica shrugged. "That's usually what people say when they're broke." I looked toward my mother, Eleanor. She heard every word. She simply sipped her champagne. That wasn't new. Over the years I'd watched dozens of little moments exactly like this. A comment about Sarah's clothes, a joke about where she grew up, a remark about her humble online craft business. Nothing loud enough to start a fight, just enough to leave a bruise. Every single time I'd convinced myself it wasn't worth making the gala uncomfortable. Every single time Sarah had quietly let it go. Chloe tugged gently on Sarah's sleeve. "Mom." Sarah leaned down. "Yeah, sweetheart. Did Aunt Veronica not like it?" Sarah smiled with heartbreaking patience. "Some people just show excitement differently." I wished I believed that. Dinner started a few minutes later. The conversation drifted from market trends to upcoming investment opportunities for evergreen senior living. Daniel talked about replacing his luxury sedan. Veronica described an expensive European cruise they'd booked for spring. Then, almost casually, Veronica looked at Sarah. "You know, I still can't believe Michael married someone who sells trinkets online." A couple of nervous chuckles floated around the table. Sarah set down her fork. "Veronica." Her voice stayed calm. "Please stop. Just that. No yelling. No insults. Just 2 words. Please stop." Eleanor suddenly pushed back her chair. Before I understood what was happening, she crossed the room. Her hand struck Sarah's face with a sharp crack. The entire ballroom froze. Sarah didn't even raise a hand to defend herself. Eleanor stared down at her. "She's right." Her voice was cold. "You'll always be just a crafter to me." She pointed toward Chloe. "Take your daughter and get out." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. I could hear the soft hum of the gala's sound system. Then I heard something much worse. A tiny voice beside me. "Dad." Chloe's eyes filled with tears. "Did Grandma kick us out because Mom sells trinkets?" That question broke something inside me. I knelt beside her chair. I took both of her little hands. "No, sweetheart." I looked straight into her eyes. "Grandma forgot what kindness looks like." Chloe nodded once. She didn't completely understand. Maybe she wasn't supposed to. I stood up. Still nobody said a word. Daniel looked stunned. Veronica folded her arms as if she'd won an argument. My mother waited for me to apologize. Instead, I walked over to Sarah. A red handprint had already begun forming on her cheek. "You okay?" I asked quietly. She nodded even though we both knew she wasn't. I helped her into her coat. Chloe slipped her small backpack over one shoulder without being asked. As I reached for our gift bag, I noticed one keepsake lying beneath the edge of the dining table. It had shattered when someone knocked it to the floor during the commotion. Chloe's keepsake. The one she'd painted herself. I crouched down, picked up every broken piece one by one. I placed them carefully back into the little craft box we'd brought from home. Then I carried it to the car. No goodbye. No shouting. No threats. The drive back to Raleigh felt longer than usual. Snow drifted across the highway in slow white ribbons. Nobody spoke for almost 20 minutes. Finally, Sarah whispered, "I'm sorry." I tightened my hands around the steering wheel. "No." My voice cracked. "I'm the one who's sorry." She turned toward me. "I spent 27 years asking you to be patient," I said. "I should have been asking them to be better." She reached over and held my hand for the rest of the drive. Later that night, after Chloe had fallen asleep on the couch under her favorite blanket, Sarah went upstairs. I walked into the garage alone. Beneath my old toolbox was a worn envelope in my father Michael Sr.'s handwriting. I hadn't opened it in years. Inside was one sentence that suddenly felt less like advice and more like a warning. "One day you'll have to choose between keeping the peace and protecting your family." I read it 3 times. Then I folded it carefully and put it back. When I finally went inside, my phone was vibrating across the kitchen counter. "Mom, Daniel, Mom again, Veronica." I turned it face down and went to bed. The next morning, fresh snow covered the backyard. The coffee maker had just finished brewing when I picked up my phone. 32 missed calls, 1 voicemail, my mother's name. I pressed play. Her voice was shaking. "Michael, please call me." I stood at the kitchen window staring out at the untouched snow. For the first time in 27 years, I did absolutely nothing. I wish I could tell you ignoring those calls came easily. It didn't. I stood in my kitchen with a mug of coffee growing cold in my hands while my mother's voicemail replayed in my head. "Michael, please call me." 27 years of habit told me to grab my truck keys, go fix whatever had gone wrong with Evergreen Senior Living. That's what I always did. Instead, I looked through the window. Chloe was already outside in the backyard, bundled in her bright blue winter coat, trying to make the biggest snow angel she'd ever made. Sarah stepped onto the porch carrying 2 mugs of hot chocolate. They laughed about something I couldn't hear. For the first time in years, I realized my family was only 3 people. The phone rang again. I turned it over without answering. Sarah came back inside a few minutes later. "You don't have to decide today," she said gently. "I'm not deciding today." "What are you doing then?" I thought about it for a long moment. For once, I smiled sadly. "I'm doing nothing." That sounded simple. It wasn't. Doing nothing meant refusing to rescue everyone else. By the 3rd day after the gala, another voicemail arrived. Daniel, his voice tight with frustration, left a message. "Michael, the state auditors are asking questions about the Q3 financials for Evergreen. Mom's nowhere to be found, and Veronica's panicking. Call me." I knew those Q3 financials. I'd spent countless late nights over the past decade quietly reallocating funds, correcting discrepancies, and obscuring the true operational costs that Eleanor and Daniel consistently ignored. Every quarter, I'd clean up the books, ensure the necessary regulatory reports were filed, and make sure vendor payments didn't fall through the cracks. Not because anyone asked, but because if I didn't, the whole flimsy structure of Evergreen Senior Living would collapse. I deleted the voicemail. That afternoon, a cold front rolled across central North Carolina. The local news warned of freezing rain and potential power outages overnight. Normally, I'd already be driving toward the main Evergreen facility in Charlotte with my laptop and a stack of ledgers in the back of my SUV, ready to perform another financial triage. Instead, I helped Chloe finish the elaborate birdhouse we'd started building before the gala. She painted tiny, vibrant hummingbirds on the sides, meticulously adding details with a brush almost as big as her hand. Sarah watched us from the kitchen window with the kind of smile I hadn't seen in years. A genuine, unguarded smile. "Dad," Chloe said, tightening one crooked screw with a small screwdriver, "is Grandma still mad?" I set my drill down. "I don't know." "Are we mad?" "No." "Then why aren't we going to help?" Kids have a way of asking questions adults spend years avoiding. I sat beside her on the workbench. "Helping someone is a gift," I said. "It stops being a gift when they believe they can hurt you and still expect it." She thought about that for a moment, her brow furrowed in concentration. "I think Mom always gave Grandma gifts." "She did," I confirmed. "And Grandma broke them." I looked toward the house where Sarah was now hanging freshly baked cookies on a cooling rack, her silhouette framed by the warm kitchen light. "Sometimes," I said quietly, "people don't realize what they have until it isn't there anymore." That night, Daniel called 6 times. I didn't answer. The following morning, the news showed widespread power outages across the region, affecting several elder care facilities. My phone buzzed again. Another voicemail. This time, Daniel sounded genuinely exhausted, his voice laced with panic. "Michael, the generator at the Northwood facility is down, and we've got critical residents on oxygen. The emergency maintenance team can't get there because of the ice, and Mom's just yelling at everyone. We need you. They're talking about calling the state health department." I knew that generator. I'd personally overseen its installation 5 years earlier, after securing a grant Eleanor had almost let expire. Every autumn, I'd clean the fuel lines, check the battery, and ensure it was ready for winter. Not because anyone asked, but because if I didn't, nobody would. I closed the message without listening again. It hurt more than I expected. Not because of the generator. Not because of the potential fines or the immediate crisis. It hurt because every problem, every looming disaster, reminded me of another year I'd quietly fixed something, absorbed a cost, or averted a catastrophe without ever asking why nobody else learned how, or why they simply expected me to be the invisible safety net. Sarah noticed the weight on my face when I came inside. "You can still go," she said gently, her eyes full of understanding. "I know. You won't be weak if you do. I also won't be protecting you if I keep pretending nothing happened," I replied, the words heavy with unspoken years. She walked over and took my hand, her fingers intertwining with mine. "I'm not asking you to choose me over your mother," she said, her gaze steady. "I already did." She looked down, a faint, sad smile touching her lips. "I should have done it years ago." That afternoon, we took Chloe to a nearby indoor climbing gym. She scaled the walls with a newfound confidence, laughing so hard she could barely catch her breath. Halfway through the afternoon, she slipped her little hand into mine as we rested between climbs. "I like this time better," she said, her voice soft. "I stopped walking. Even after what happened." She nodded. "Nobody yelled today." Those 4 words stayed with me. Nobody yelled today. I realized my daughter had started measuring happiness by the absence of conflict, by the quiet dignity of our home. No child should have to do that. By the second week of January, the missed calls from Eleanor and Daniel slowed down. Then an official-looking envelope arrived instead. It was a notice from the state's Elder Care Regulatory Board, indicating a preliminary inquiry into Evergreen Senior Living's operational practices and financial reporting. It wasn't addressed to me, but to Eleanor as CEO. It had been forwarded to our address, likely because my address was still listed as the primary contact for all official correspondence, a detail I had handled for so many years. I quietly placed it in a drawer. Not because I wanted Evergreen to face sanctions, but because it wasn't mine to manage anymore. For the first time, everyone involved would have to deal with responsibilities that had always magically disappeared. A few days later, I was replacing a loose cabinet hinge in our kitchen when someone pounded on the front door hard enough to rattle the glass. Daniel. His face looked older and more haggard than I'd ever seen it. "You've got some nerve, Michael." I opened the door but didn't invite him inside. "Morning." "Morning," he snapped. "Evergreen is falling apart. Mom's drowning in paperwork and regulatory demands, and you're acting like nothing happened." "I didn't make her slap my wife." "You know that's not what this is about," he retorted, rubbing both hands across his face in exasperation. "No," I answered calmly. "I think it is. You've always handled this stuff," Daniel pleaded, his voice cracking slightly. "I know. So fix it." The words hung between us. For years, they would have worked. Not anymore. "I can't." His frustration turned into disbelief. "You can't?" "No." "You mean you won't?" I didn't correct him. Daniel stared at me for several long seconds, his eyes searching mine for any sign of the old Michael. Then he shook his head, a defeated slump in his shoulders. "I don't even know where to start." For the first time, I believed him. He truly didn't know because he'd never had to. I glanced toward the basement door. Behind it sat a worn cardboard file box I'd filled over the years. Every receipt, every vendor invoice, every regulatory filing, every financial adjustment, every staffing report, every resident complaint resolution, everything no one else had ever bothered to notice, or even glance at. I looked back at Daniel. "Maybe," I said quietly, "it's finally time you learned where to start." Daniel stood on my front porch for almost a full minute after I mentioned the file box. He looked past me toward the basement door, his expression a mixture of confusion and annoyance. What file box? The one that explains why you don't know where to start. He frowned, crossing his arms. I don't need a lecture, Michael. I wasn't planning on giving you one. For a second, I considered closing the door. Part of me wanted to simply let him flounder as I had for so long. But another part remembered all the years I'd kept quiet, believing silence was the same thing as kindness. It wasn't. Come inside. Sarah looked up from the kitchen when Daniel walked in. She didn't say a word. She simply nodded politely before disappearing upstairs to help Chloe with homework. I noticed Daniel watching her. The fading outline of the slap was still visible if you knew where to look. He lowered his eyes. I didn't know Mom would. I know. No. He swallowed, his gaze fixed on the floor. I really didn't. I believed him. That didn't erase what happened, but it explained part of the willful ignorance. I opened the basement door and walked downstairs. The file box sat exactly where I'd left it, tucked beneath a workbench beside old paint cans and forgotten holiday decorations. It wasn't anything special. Just a faded cardboard storage box with Evergreen, Financials Ops, scrawled across the side in black marker. I carried it upstairs and set it on the dining room table. Daniel laughed once, a short, bitter sound. You've got to be kidding. I'm not. He lifted the lid. Inside were neatly organized folders. Year after year, every folder labeled, 2014, Q1, 2014, Q2, 2015, Q1, all the way to the present. He pulled out the first one, a stack of receipts, vendor invoices for critical supplies, unexpected repairs. I nodded. You paid these when Evergreen's cash flow was tight and Mom refused to dip into the emergency reserve. He opened another folder, regulatory fines and compliance. Then another, payroll adjustments and unaccounted hours. Another, resident trust account shortfalls. Another, facility upgrades and maintenance, unbudgeted. Another, insurance renewals, premium increases. Another, unbilled services and collections. He even found a folder labeled Michael Sr.'s Legacy, which contained detailed notes on how my father had intended the business to run, complete with projected budgets and ethical guidelines for patient care. Daniel stopped flipping pages. His voice became quieter, almost a whisper. I don't understand. You weren't supposed to. What do you mean? I never wanted anyone to feel guilty. I never wanted Mom to feel like a burden, or for the business Dad built to fail. I smiled sadly. So, every time Mom thanked you for helping Evergreen stay afloat, you were usually thanking me. He sat down heavily, the chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. The room suddenly felt very small, suffocating with unspoken truths. I thought she handled all this herself. I thought she was a financial wizard. So did she. He looked confused. What? I never wanted Mom to feel like she was failing. So you let her believe that everything somehow worked itself out, that the business was always thriving, that any issues were minor and easily resolved by her oversight. Silence settled between us, thick and oppressive. Finally, Daniel whispered, "How much?" I leaned back, my gaze drifting toward the window. I stopped adding it up years ago. The emotional cost was too high to quantify. No, he insisted, his eyes still fixed on the receipts, the invoices, the careful notes. Tell me. I hesitated, the memory of countless sleepless nights flashing through my mind. Over $500,000. Give or take. His head snapped up, eyes wide with disbelief. What? $500,000? Spread over 10 years of direct contributions, covered losses, and diverted personal funds to keep Evergreen solvent and compliant. He ran both hands through his hair, a gesture of profound shock. I had no idea. I know. He picked up another folder. Inside was a spiral notebook. What is this? My operational log. He opened a random page. January 9th, reconciled patient trust accounts, identified $7,500 discrepancy. March 18th, emergency repairs, Northwood kitchen plumbing, covered out of pocket. October 27th, filed overdue state regulatory reports, averted compliance fine. Every page looked the same. Dates, issues, solutions, costs, notes. No complaints, just work. Daniel slowly closed the notebook, his face pale. You were over there this often? Usually once a week. Sometimes more, sometimes less, depending on the crisis. His face went even paler. I live 15 minutes away. I didn't answer because there wasn't anything left to say. At that moment, Veronica walked through the front door without knocking, her designer bag slung over her shoulder. I knew your SUV was here, she announced, her eyes sweeping the room, landing on the table laden with folders. What's all this? Daniel didn't answer. She picked up a receipt, then another, a look of disdain on her face. Oh, please. She rolled her eyes. So, you kept records. Big deal. I always do, I replied calmly. She folded her arms, her voice dripping with accusation. You're still her son. Children are supposed to help their parents. I nodded once. They are. There. She pointed toward me, a triumphant smirk on her face. So, stop acting like some kind of martyr. I looked at her calmly. I never said children shouldn't help. Then what's your point? My point is, I gently closed the folder in front of her, the soft thud echoing in the quiet room, there's a difference between choosing to help someone and having them believe they're entitled to it. She scoffed. Sounds like the same thing to me. No. I met her eyes, holding her gaze. It isn't. The room fell quiet again. Daniel looked from me to Veronica, then back to the box. His shoulders seemed to sink another inch under the weight of the revelation. You never asked any of us for a dime. No. You never even mentioned it. No. Why? I smiled without humor. Because I thought that's what family did. I thought protecting Evergreen, protecting Mom, was my responsibility. He looked like someone had punched him. I should have helped. You should have known. Before either of us could say anything else, my phone buzzed. The caller ID read Evelyn Reed, our family's attorney. I excused myself and stepped into the hallway. Michael. Evelyn's voice sounded measured as always. I met with your mother this morning. I closed my eyes. I figured she would call you eventually. She has questions about your role as successor trustee for Evergreen Senior Living. Specifically, she's considering challenging your decisions regarding the operational budget and patient trust accounts. I almost laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. What decisions? I've been the one making the decisions she ignored. Exactly, Evelyn sighed. I told her you haven't exercised any extraordinary authority. In fact, you've gone beyond what the trust requires, often at your own personal expense. I leaned against the wall, the cool plaster a stark contrast to the heat rising in my chest. Did she believe you? Not yet. Another pause. Michael? Yeah. I've represented your family, and Evergreen, for almost 20 years. I've rarely seen someone do more than the trust required, especially when it came to propping up a failing business. I looked toward the dining room. Daniel was still sitting there, surrounded by 10 years of paperwork. Veronica had stopped talking, her face a mask of dawning comprehension. For once, Evelyn spoke again. I think it's time everyone understands why your father appointed you. After we hung up, I stood there for a long moment. My father, Michael Sr., hadn't only left me responsibility, he'd left me something else: permission. Permission to stop confusing sacrifice with love. When I walked back into the dining room, Daniel looked up, his eyes clouded with a new understanding. What now? I looked at the file box, then at my younger brother. Now, I said quietly, you learned something Dad never wanted either of us to forget. I turned toward the old cabinet in the corner of the room. Inside, behind a stack of photo albums, lay a worn envelope addressed in my father's unmistakable handwriting. I had carried its words along for years, a silent burden. Maybe it wasn't mine to carry anymore. Lessons from this story. Setting clear boundaries is essential to prevent exploitation, even by family. There's a crucial difference between genuinely helping someone and enabling their irresponsible behavior. Silence in the face of injustice can be more damaging than confrontation. True family support involves mutual respect, not a sense of entitlement to another's sacrifices.